And Ali, we are on episode 98, getting closer to that 100 episode mark. I think you mentioned it last episode. Eileen Gu, we've reached out to her. We're still waiting for a reply to Eileen Gu's invitation for a 100th episode. It's got to be worth it, right, for her, right? I mean, yeah, she's definitely going to be on the show sometime. Maybe not the next episode, but in the future.
As soon as she gets busy from winning gold.
My wife just thinks that all my children should just be like Eileen and try to emulate her greatness. So we'll definitely have that talk with her later on. But anyway, if you want to hear any of our past episodes, you can visit our website at johnstation.com to indulge in all those previous episodes. And now we're on YouTube, as you know, Instagram and TikTok. All you have to do is to subscribe is just type us in the search bar and you will find Shanghai John. Well, Ali, today's episode is going to talk about China's innovation paradox. For decades, the Chinese market has been defined by a gold rush mentality. And, you and I were really a part of that in many ways. It was a place where a clean hotel room could instantly disrupt an entire industry overnight. Remember the Blue Frog? Remember going Blue Frog, right? It's still there.
I still go there every time I'm there, yeah.
Still there.
I mean, I remember the founder, he told me that he really felt that he was responsible to introduce the customized hamburger to the Chinese masses. And he said, despite the foray into Asian menus, people went to Blue Frog. They went there for a cheeseburger, which is great analogy. It was this massive time of consumer enthusiasm, so high that every niche product seemed to have a market. You could literally find every niche product. I did a conference, a meeting with the Danish Chamber of Commerce, and they introduced me to savory licorice, which I took it home, and my Taiwanese wife was not a fan. Neither was any of my Chinese friends. But they said that they found a niche for this type of licorice in China. They could find a market for it. Do you remember any products, Ali, that were just, you couldn't believe that had a foothold in China, that had a market?
Amongst the Western products?
Yes. Anything that you were like, gosh, they sell this in China? Do you ever have that kind of moment?
I don't know, donuts. But a lot of the products that
Donuts.
I really like. No, and I'm going back maybe 20 years, but a lot of the products that I really enjoyed eating, and this is just little donuts that you would get. I think it was Bimbo or one of the Spanish brands that introduced them first in the early 2000s. But a lot of those products didn't last too long on shelf. The licorice product that you're referring to, that was a lot more popular because of its connection with Chinese medicine. And I think that root ingredient that goes into licorice is very exciting for Chinese people that familiar with traditional medicine.
Yeah, no, I remember even when they opened the first Pizza Hut in Beijing, and I remember my students telling me, like, this will be a failure. This will be a failure. So why not? Well, Chinese people don't eat cheese. So, I mean, there's just so many examples of that. But it feels now that the market's shifting a bit. We're feeling the stones to an era of the high-speed cutthroat competition where every novel idea seems to be instantly mirrored by local players.
I was just going to talk about coffee. But coffee and the variety of coffee that you can get in Shanghai today, I think it outclasses most countries and some of the most trendy neighborhoods in the world. Manoj, I don't know how good your Hindi is, but whenever I say this, the two words, it's actually an abuse in Hindi, but it's called pound show. Okay, so I'm gonna do the Frenchify the word. But they've opened one up in London now. It was opened up in Shanghai.
Uh-huh.
They opened up a bunch of chains in China, and then they've got, reversed and they've taken it back to Europe. And it's supposed to be one of the best places to go for a cup of coffee and some bakery.
So it's just amazing the number of local players. And I guess the question is the China dream still there for foreign entrepreneurs? Or are we simply seeing a market that's completely recoded? It's got new rules, and there's just really no opportunities there. So today we are honored to be joined by Manoj Mehta and Gibbs. Manoj is the CEO for the Shanghai-based Naked Group since 2012. He's been in China since 2005. Naked Group promotes a sustainable lifestyle through its luxury resorts, shared workplaces, and products. Naked's base camp, which is famous in the place in Morgansan. You stayed there before, right?
I've stayed at the retreat and I've been to the stables.
And I have and both, and also I helped set up the Land Rover thing there as well. So it's really amazing. It's just incredible. We'll also be joined by returning guest Gibbs. Kerr is the author of the best-selling book Selling to China and has a new book, The Fragile Dragon, which should be hitting bookstores very soon. Kerr first came to China in 1985 and has worked in various roles. He was previously president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai and is currently teaching at the University of San Francisco. Manoj, Kerr, welcome to Shanghai Zan.
Great to be with you, Bryce.
Thank
Pleasure.
you.
And congratulations on 98 episodes.
Yeah, no, amazing, right?
Yeah.
We've seen a number of times in China that has kind of evolved from this copycat nation to a great innovator. Manoj, as someone who was really at the forefront of the entrepreneurial spirit there, in an environment where, as I mentioned, any successful idea seems to attract 3 instant, well-funded local competitors, is novelty still a viable business strategy in China?
So, Bryce, I would look at it slightly differently. When you started the episode, you spoke about the gold rush. And yes, early 2000, maybe late 90s, it was sort of like gold rush and everybody was out there. But just like gold rush, for everyone who found gold, there are 100 who didn't. And you don't hear about the other 100, you only hear about the ones who did. And there were a lot of sad stories that followed the whole gold rush mentality. And what happened in China is probably not a whole lot different from the same sort of a situation. I remember in early 2000s, as long as your product sounded foreign, it sold because there was just such a shortage. China had been a closed nation for decades. So the brand awareness of a Gucci and something that sounded Italian had about the same level of brand awareness. So, there were a lot of, substandard products that were still selling. And if you fast forward to where you are today, where the Chinese consumer has become significantly more sophisticated and they are very savvy about the product features, more so than some of the Western consumers, and they know the product details inside out. So the time of anything can sell to these Chinese people is gone. For sure. And as things have evolved in last 20 some years, Chinese people traveling abroad and getting experiences and bringing those experiences back. And even within China, when the products were being launched, the next product had slightly more improvement. And so the customers, going back to the naked customers, when we first opened, as long as you gave them something foreign, it was attractive. But today's Chinese consumer who comes to one of our resort is extremely demanding and significantly more demanding than let's say a Western customer than in a Western country. And I'll share some examples with you, especially in the hospitality industry. If a hotel doesn't have Dyson hair dryer, somebody's going to make a comment about this. If it doesn't have a toilet that talks to you and opens up when you walk by, people are going to comment about it. Why? Because these features, these gimmicks are being offered by the next player to try and differentiate from the existing one. And the new things are being offered, and the Chinese customer saying, okay, I want this, yeah, I like this. So that's happened. And in terms of the you made a point about there are 3 local competitors. So as an entrepreneur, you don't really care, at least in the world where I live in. I'm not talking about some sensitive national security level products, but in my type of world, competitor is a competitor, whether it's a foreign competitor or Chinese competitor. And contrary to maybe general belief that the Chinese competitors or Chinese players got some additional benefits, I haven't seen that in my industry at all. So we just look at people as a competitor, whether they're global or so we have Marriott as a competitor in our backyard. And then we've got a whole bunch of Chinese, and we've got Italians and French entrepreneurs who are trying to do something similar to what we have done. So what has happened in the 15, 20 years, as the Chinese have become more sophisticated, plus the more capital has become available, and Chinese being traders is in their DNA. When they see an economic opportunity, like if these 2 foreigners from, South Africa and America can come and do this in our backyard, hell, we could do it too. What's happening in China is is a classic economic theory. When there are profits to be made, it's going to attract competition, and the competition is going to come because there are more Chinese in China. So it's going to come from China more likely than outside. I see it as just China is evolving to be a more mature and more sophisticated, both in terms of consumer demands and the capital that's available, the opportunities that are available. Technology has certainly helped in that area. So there are more Chinese willing to take risks that those opportunities were not even available to them back in late 90s or early 2000s. So I think it's just a natural economic theory.
I think that asking for a Dyson hairdryer is asking too much, but I side with them on the talking toilet. There's no way I'm staying in any 5-star hotel, and if the toilet ain't talking to me, man, then I'm out the door. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure, Ali, you agree with me on the talking toilets too.
No, I don't mind the talking toilet myself. I mean, it also warms your backside, and there's a
Yeah, it
couple of
gives
other
you a
features as
massage,
well.
and does a nice job of washing you, but like, how
I
many
don't
times have you seen a toilet anywhere even close to that
know.
in even a fancy hotel in the Western world?
Oh no, I have this with my sister, and I tell her like you're still using paper, and she's like, she thinks like, you mean you put water there? I go, "You damn right you do." Why are you so obsessed with it? What do you think, Kurt? You mentioned in your book about a changing market. Rules have changed. Do you think that this is the case, that there's no opportunities for foreign players now, foreign entrepreneurs? If they go there, expect massive competition and very, as Manoj said, very sophisticated consumers.
Well, first of all, to start with this, I would need absolute quiet in my bathroom while I'm doing my business, and so I don't want talking of any kind from the toilet or anybody else. But to jump off a couple of things that Manoj has said, actually, it's interesting that he actually still used the word copycat in the conversation. I think I really could, the Chinese entrepreneurs are still copying, but the difference is that they're raising the bar. They're sort of looking at, which to me is, and I'm sure you'd agree that that's fundamental to capitalism. You look at what other people are doing, and then you try to outdo that, and that, I think you see it in almost every market. Just talking about the gold rush mentality, yeah, I think it definitely evolved. I'm not sure what metaphor is best, but maybe back when we had the gold rush, when we're talking about the 90s and sort of early days of the post WTO in the early 2000s, it was a gold rush mentality, but the probability of hitting gold was actually very high. In other words,
That's true.
coming to China with the
Yeah.
novel product, an idea, a decent product, and in those days it was mainly about execution risk. In other words, if you could execute effectively, then you actually had a very high probability of being successful. And the nature of the market back then, you talked about niche products and things like this, but the way I view it is back in those days there were huge gaps in the market, and those gaps had to be filled. And so one of my early investments in China was a company called Orange Hotels, which is in a similar business as Naked, in the sense that it's also hospitality, but we were filling a different market need from what Naked was doing, whereas Naked's more high end, more resort. Orange Hotels was basically, for lack of a better metaphor, the Motel 6 of China. A clean, comfortable room, and we'll keep the light on for you. No frills, but it was filling a gap, and there was a huge gap actually, between the 5-star hotels that were charging, anywhere from $300 a night and up, and then down to the really horrible local hotels that were filthy,
Cigarette
dark,
burns.
cigarette burns.
Table.
They were horrible, and so there was this gap in the middle, and we hit it just right. We founded the company, I think it was 2005, 2006, and we hit it just at the time when the Chinese middle class was coming up. Chinese entrepreneurs had a little bit of money in their pocket, and they were demanding more. They were demanding better than those hotels. Yet they didn't have the need for a 5-star hotel. So we came into the market when that was that giant glaring gap, and so we were able to fill that gap. But you're absolutely right, Bryce. I mean, there were all kinds of things in this market before, where you just sort of show up with something foreign and different, and wham, you got the whole market. The bar is much, much higher now, and so but I wouldn't call it closed and I wouldn't call it unfair or unavailable. It's still a large market. It is still available. It is still China. It generally is still a very business forward kind of environment, but it's competitive. And you've got competition from everywhere. You got the other foreign companies and you got local competition. And as Manoj was saying, and they're going to copy the heck out of you and they're going to innovate the heck out of you. So you need to move just as fast, if not faster than them. And that's really the challenge. So, yeah.
How deep do your pockets need to be in order to outplay or outsmart your competition?
Yeah, that's a good question, Ali. I think you have to have deep pockets, but you also have to be ready to pivot. And the pivot part is hard because Chinese companies adjust really quickly. And so for a foreign company going in, you've got actually a difficult equation in the sense that if you're a foreign company, you are not ready for the China market unless you have a very well-established business in your home country. If you don't, you have no business venturing out into China because you won't make it. You don't have the deep pockets that you mentioned. But the problem there is and we can talk about some of the spectacular failures that foreign companies have had in China because that equation has to be solved. You have to have a very well-established product, service, business. But then when you get to China, you have to be ready to pivot that due to local market conditions, competition, or regulatory environment, what have you. Those two variables act opposite each other. And just to give a concrete example to that, one of the spectacular failures that a lot of us still talk about is the failure of eBay. And there are books written about this, but eBay failed for a number of reasons. But one of them was and I write about this in my book. Thanks for mentioning that, Bryce, the Fragile Dragon. But one of the chapters is talking about the foreign tech companies generally, but eBay specifically. But the fact that eBay was so well established and had figured out the market so well in the US market primarily, but other major markets, led them to believe that they had already figured out everything globally, and especially particularly in China, and they hadn't. When they got to China, they realized just a bunch of different things that they had to figure out, that where they would have had to pivot their model in 10 different ways in order to compete with Taobao and with others, and they just didn't. So in some sense, they were a victim of their own success.
I don't think eBay ever saw success in China, but I mean, I know brands that did, like Ford, GM, The Gap. I mean, some of I worked on Ford for a long time. We hit 1 million car sales, and then there was like this spectacular fail. Why do you think that, major foreign brands initially found this success, but then they later experienced this failure? What do you think the reason for that?
There are several obviously factors that probably are at play. So one point that Kerr made, and I completely agree with him, that in the early 2000 or even late 90s, there were such huge gaps that if you showed up with a reasonable product, it filled a niche, not niche, it filled a big gap because that service or product just wasn't there. But let's take Volkswagen. Volkswagen was the only brand that existed in China in late 90s and had a market share of 85% or upwards of 85%, including the Audi, which was the government car. And so when the GMs and Fords and Nissan and Honda and everybody and their uncle starts coming to China, they are going to go down. There's no way that's sustainable. Ford and I mean, at one point, GM was making more money in China than they were making in the rest of the world combined, because GM's GL8 was the standard luxury car for foreigners and Chinese people alike. In a way, GM and Ford's failure is probably not that dissimilar to what's happening in the US, and China market moved to EV a lot faster. And you saw recently Ford have actually just completely shut down they've taken a $20 billion hit, and the EV is out because of the whatever reasons they're having, whether it's Tesla, whether it's BYD, whether it's or 50 other brands that have come about. Those cars are very well suited for the local market and local needs. And GM, that had initially enjoyed this amazing success, now finds themselves with a product that's outdated. And eBay, the example that Kurt just shared, Taobao was inspired by eBay. Jack Ma, happened to be in the US, and he's like, wow, I could do this thing better than this in China. And Taobao was able to localize the whole idea of eBay, which was fairly simple. You've got something used, you want to sell, here is a platform. And he built it more for Chinese than copy and paste a US model or a Western model to China. Same thing happened with Uber. Uber came to China. They were fighting tooth and nail with Didi. Didi's model was that they put even the taxis were on Didi. Uber was only private cars, and eventually Didi ate Uber and gave them $1 billion to get out, and Airbnb the same. So there are lots of these products fail to localize their product features, and the local guys just did it better, faster.
I was just going to draw a reference, an example to what Jack Ma did in order to get started as well. He just started buying his own products so that all of the vendors would get really excited and talk about the fact that just rubbish products were getting sold. And if someone that sold nails was able to sell nails, and that was good news for anyone that was selling something of greater value. The other example also is there used to be a club as well at the corner of, I think it was Changlelu and maybe Xiangyanglu or something to that effect. And it was a Chinese club, and there was always people outside, but there's never people inside. And the way they would pack people into the club, or at least they would deceive you into believing that the club was very busy, was one, keeping the music on really, really loud, and two, hiring a ton of touts that were just hanging outside so that you got the sense that it was very busy. So that's another Jack Ma type of approach to get it. And so to your point on pivoting, that's something that you would do in China, but no one's going to hire a bunch of dudes to hang outside a club and, and think that it's that's actually operational. And that's that's something that's very Chinese and very unique to this culture.
Yeah, Ali, I think you're right about that. Jack Ma, obviously being from China, he understood the local environment really well. And from both aspects, you mentioned, hiring the touts and playing some dirty tricks, frankly. And again, eBay came into the market, clean, publicly traded U.S. company. It's like, we're not going to do any of that. And so, okay, well, then they missed the market. But Jack Ma also understood that he was dealing with a, what people used to call China, a low trust society or a low trust environment, market environment. And so he understood that he needed to deal with that within the context of the payment systems and the trust that did not exist with vendors. It had no trust whatsoever. So Jack understood a lot of that again, eBay coming out from Silicon Valley, they didn't have a chance. I mean, they just were going to fail no matter what. But picking up on a couple other things that Manoj had said about Uber, I mean, I think each of the failures of foreign companies in China has its own story, but they do kind of fall into several categories, and the localization obviously is one. But another is that I think some of the companies like Uber misunderstood sort of speed, volume, and quality, and sort of got that equation wrong. In other words, a lot of companies, and I would say Uber, I would say LinkedIn, or other companies come to China and they kind of get mesmerized by the high volume. And they think that they have to go and cover the whole market all at once and sort of forget about that quality side of the equation. In other words, Uber, and I remember when they came into the market and it was lovely because, the Uber drivers and the cars were just so much better than the local taxis. And we were just rejoicing, that there was this high quality product in the market. And instead of doing that, they ended up going out into tier 2, tier 3 cities and trying to spread the model as like peanut butter across the entire country, and didn't really pay attention to sort of the quality of their product and the integrity of the whole system. The second thing that I think they got wrong, and a lot of companies get wrong, is that the challenge of the local regulatory environment. That relationship between business and government, it's unique in China, and it can be very synergistic. And again, I write about this a fair bit in my book because this is a big part of what the American Chamber of Commerce does in China, is helping companies to bridge that gap. And again, this is something that local companies understand intuitively, and they have much better skills in-house to deal with local regulators. And foreign companies, I mean, of course, they're going to hire somebody to do, government relations or public outreach and things like this. But it's a skill unto itself. And that's something that I think has been a
So,
big
Kara,
gap.
just to add to your point about the regulatory environment as well as the government policy. So if the business model either reactively or just sheer luck, happens to align with the government stated policies, it works in your favor like, hot knife and butter. And I'll just use this Naked as an example. So Naked was building resorts in the rural areas, in the mountains, in a sustainable way, not cutting forests, digging ditches by hand, the whole 9 yards. And then the government comes out and has policies around. Xi Jinping used this very popular phrase called green mountain and blue sky economy. So essentially, make these rural areas, activate the rural areas in economic sense. And that's exactly what we were doing. And later on, government had a policy about rural revitalization and carbon neutrality. These were like Christmas came early gifts for Naked because we were already doing this. And the local government people were saying like, hey, can you do more of this in my backyard? We'll try and support you. So we didn't really have any guanxis, or we didn't have enough money to even think about bribing anybody because we just couldn't and wouldn't. But the local government officials would chase us to do something because it scores points for them, because they are doing what the central government is saying is in the interest of the national economy. So if your business model aligns with the government policies, it works really well. It doesn't matter whether you're a foreign business or a Chinese business.
Interesting. Curry, you mentioned the book about the fragility of China. And last week we had Brian Wong on and mentioned to us that China now, according to the Global Soft Power Index, is number 2 in the world, behind the US at number 1. Not Korea, not Japan, but China. And there is really a popular resurgence amongst young people in this country about being pro-China, and our own government's probably not helping give them confidence on an alternative. But there's obviously a lot of positivity that's going on, in which, I mean, all of us would share that a bit of that positivity ourselves, and we've been all very pro-China from the very beginning. But you mentioned in the book that it's not all that secure, that there are things in the system. Manoj mentioned the regulatory environment. It can go either way for you. What do you mean by the foundation of sand versus stone? Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. Happy to elaborate on that. It's not either or, but maybe it's that the foundation is both sand and stone, right? Because it's both. And then just to actually to go back to what Manoj was talking about in the regulatory environment, it can go both ways. The regulatory. I mean, look at what happened to the tech sector when the regulations changed overnight, and then wham! We saw $1 trillion worth of market cap erased from the so-called Chinese tech champions. Well, that was a regulatory thing. But Manoj is right as well. Is that if your business is aligned with the government, and it's not that hard. You have to listen for it and you have to communicate it. And to link back to the auto business, for example, I mean, it was not a mystery that China was going to go to EVs. It caught GM and Ford by surprise, but it didn't catch any of the local players by surprise. And after it happened, people looked back and realized that this has been happening for 20 years. So it shouldn't really have been a surprise at all. But Bryce, my point in the book is that it's both. It's a fragile dragon, right? China is both a dragon, which means it's very strong and powerful, but it also has vulnerabilities. It has weaknesses, and some are sort of internal to the system. Others are just kind of the accident of history or geography. But to start kind of at the macro level and sort of talk about what everybody's talking about these days, which is trade and trade deficits, probably one of the more significant weaknesses, I guess you could say, in the Chinese model is its trade relationships with other countries. China is a fundamentally trading nation. It is dependent on exports. It trades with almost every country in the world, and is in fact the most important trading partner to about 80 countries in the world, which is a huge number. But it's also got a very imbalanced trade. Overall, the cumulative trade deficit that China enjoys is worth over $1 trillion. That means it sells $1 trillion more. It's exporting $1 trillion more than it's importing. And this creates imbalances with almost all of its trading partners, except for the ones for which it's importing minerals and resources. And so that has created relationships that are unstable, especially with the major markets, the US and Europe. And it's true that China has developed new markets. As I mentioned, it trades with almost every country in the world and is really leaning in on Latin America and Africa. But again, the overall trade balance is very imbalanced. And these markets will never be able to replace North America and Europe. And that's really a frustration, I think, for China, because it's really coming into its own with respect to the quality of its products and the innovation that's coming out of China, the quality of the companies. And just to go back to automotive, I mean, I think automotive in many ways tells us everything that we need to know about the development of China and the experience of foreign companies in China. When you look at the success that GM and Ford and Volkswagen enjoyed for quite a long time until local competition came up and the market shifted, and now they're really having a struggle. But the Chinese companies are having a struggle now because of this fundamental trade weakness and access to markets. For example, if you go to Singapore, you look at the EVs, the Chinese EVs that are on the market there, 1 out of 3 cars in Singapore that's purchased, new cars purchased in Singapore is a BYD. 1 out of 3. So they are dominating the market there. And why? It's not because of price, because in a market like Singapore, the real price of the vehicle is the price of ownership of the vehicle, this the so-called right to own. So the price of the vehicle, it's not that China is selling cheap products into Singapore. That's not the case. It's selling an excellent product with the right features and the right quality. But the problem is it doesn't matter because Singapore is simply too small. It will never replace the major markets. So for the Chinese electric vehicles to really enjoy, high volume, high profit, they have to be able to get into North America and Europe. And right now they can't.
I wonder too if this is also about exporting AI and where the Americans have a huge advantage. Because we are a country so used to SaaS solutions. We will pay $20 a month for some SaaS solution. There's so many. It just blows my mind when I come back to the US and realize how many subscription accounts I personally have, not to mention the school I belong to. There's so many SaaS accounts. And the mentality in China is never about SaaS. I mean, Alex Duncan, Ali's, on the call, just always to say that no company would ever hire a SaaS company for a solution. They get like 5 guys to create, to build it themselves and save the money. And I think now that's going to bite them because the growth of AI is going to be through SaaS solutions that you're going to pay the subscription account. And the only place that really does that is outside China because no one has this SaaS mentality that they have in other markets.
Yeah. Very difficult to sell, a service to Chinese people on an ongoing basis. One time, okay, but on an ongoing, subscription, very, very difficult.
I guess it begs the question to both of you is who essentially is cracking the code? If people have really become sophisticated, they've obviously become more price conscious because the land prices have dropped and people aren't earning as much as they used to. So they're more price conscious, they're more discerning, they're more sophisticated. Who has maybe not a particular company, but a particular category of companies that, from a foreign perspective, have cracked this code and they are doing fairly well. Not maybe like before, where during the gold rush era, but they're doing fairly well, and they've able to either enter the market with something innovative, or they've been able to pivot and to the market requirements and are flourishing in China today. Or anyone come to mind?
I don't know about cracking the code necessarily, but I think it is the case that there's foreign companies that are still quite successful in China, and it's still an investable market. I think it's a challenging investable market. I mean, both Manoj and I have both, started companies in China and invest and been entrepreneurs there. I think that ship may have sailed in the sense that individual foreign entrepreneur, it's challenging. It's just you talked about Blue Frog, it's challenging to be an individual entrepreneur in China right now. Yeah. It's the sustainability. And I think that is really the key is hard to make a sustained success in China. But I think if you ask me what that code looks like and what are some of the elements of not failing in China, what would I point to? One I would say local knowledge has always been important, but at this point, I think I would emphasize that knowledge and skills to navigate the local regulatory environment. I think that is really key. And part of that is if I saw a new company coming in, I would encourage them to at least consider going in with a local partner as opposed to going in with a wholly owned subsidiary. Now, again, this is sort of back to the future. I mean, back in, the mid 80s and early 90s, the foreign companies came into the China market and kicking and screaming got linked to these JV partners. Why? Well, the why link is because the government required it, right? So the government required GM to partner with SAIC. And the problem there was that all of these were just these huge state-owned enterprises that were extremely lethargic, inefficient, and they didn't know anything. But today, I would argue that you've got really the exact opposite situation where you've got a plethora of local companies that you could partner with, all of which have terrific skills, talent, knowledge, and really now the trick is, what do they need you for? And so, but I would still encourage foreign entrants coming into the market to at least consider going with a local partner. Now, we talked about Uber; they were sort of forced into selling their business, and so now they have some of something rather than all of nothing, right? But I think that's still an upside. I think so. One is this whole local knowledge, local partner part of the equation. Two other points. Second one, I would say China's speed has always been important, but now I think it's speed and flexibility. You have to be able to pivot because the market moves so fast, and so you need sort of the top speed of the cheetah, but you also need the turning capability of the antelope. And so you need to be some kind of hybrid of those two animals. And then
Sounds
third,
like an episode of Kung Fu or something there, Kerr.
foreign companies need to consider is that in the current geopolitical environment, you have to be prepared for the idea that your China business may have to be self-contained. In other words, in the past, your China business was an extension of the headquarters, right? And leaned on the headquarters for quite a lot. But these days, in an era where now I think anything that's moving across borders, especially if it's data, if it's technology, but even raw materials and machinery, if you're moving things across borders, that can present challenges. So those are three things that I would say to foreign companies coming into the China market today.
Would you look at KFC as a really good example of that?
KFC is a good example of that. I think it is self-contained in the sense that it is hived off from the parent company. McDonald's is as well. Starbucks is also fairly well self-contained. So yeah, I think that is the new model.
And actually, if you add with KFC, if you add Pizza Hut as an example, it's extremely successful. But if you walked into a Pizza Hut in China, you won't recognize it to be the same Pizza Hut. The products they have is completely different, and it's packed and quite successful. So they've successfully localized it and not have the same main products that their US counterparts are selling. So I mean, just to add to first, completely agree with Kurt that speed and agility and flexibility and regulatory understanding the regulatory environments and local knowledge. But these joint ventures or these partnerships, if these are just marriages of convenience, then once you've just sucked out from each other, it's the foreign partner saying, I want this from you, and the Chinese partner saying, I want that from you. And once you've gotten what you wanted to, then it becomes meaningless. It's like, okay, now I don't need you. So it's really critical that the partnership that you're doing, is it actually two complementary skills that make you whole, so to speak, rather than once I get this, wham bam, thank you, man. I don't need you tomorrow morning, right? So that's one point I wanted to make. Second point is that right now, with market that's matured, consumer that's more sophisticated, property prices that you alluded to are down. The property prices are down. Majority of the Chinese people had been sitting on properties that have 7-8 times appreciated. And now it's not 7-8 times, it's only 5 times. So it's still a pretty good deal. It's just that I don't feel 5 times richer. I feel 2 or 3 times poorer. So it's a little bit of a psychological, feeling of like, hey, I used to be this high and I'm only this high. So right now that has made the economy, a little bit sluggish, and until those things kind of get reset, it makes the new products or new businesses even more challenging, because everybody is kind of holding on to whatever they have. And it's a classic case where the recession happens if everybody thinks recession's happening. And that's kind of where China is right now. And if you throw the stock market in the mix, that makes it even worse.
Agree with Manoj 100%. A big part of this is psychological. You're absolutely right. Just looking at the property market, it's like if property markets are down, if you're not a buyer or a seller, what difference does it make? But Manoj is right. It makes a difference because you feel less rich. And if you feel less rich, you're not going to go out and buy stuff. And so you've got the confluence of a lot of different things. I think that's a big one. But a second one is job insecurity. People are insecure about their job. We're seeing, and Bryce, you and I go back way back in China, back in those days when people were job hopping, every 6 months, even 3 months. Now, completely different situation. The people, you hold on to your job. If you have any kind of decent job, you hold on to it. But so when consumers feel that uncertainty, they don't buy new cars, they don't buy refrigerators. And again, all of this has a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing because all this causes deflation. And when you have a deflationary economy, people stay on the sidelines because they think they're not going to buy that car today because the car is going to be cheaper next month. And so then you've got a downward spiral. So that's the challenge that China has right now is how to break this downward spiral. And right now everything is going against the Chinese economy. I still have faith. I still think it's an investable market. I think that there's still a bright future ahead for China. It's still a large market. It's going to be not the fast growing market that it has been in, and it's not going to be the profitable market that it has been in the past because again, costs are up and prices are down, and so you got that situation. But it's still going to be a large, important, and attractive market.
I know this is a bit digressing from our topic here, but I have to ask you about Patrick McGee's book, Apple in China. You were a former executive of Apple, and I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that book. I have my own bias towards his point of view. McGee, of course, argues that Apple gave Chinese the tools and knowledge which eventually lead to our technological demise. I mean, do you concur with this point of view? I mean, it was a bestseller. It got one of the best business books last year by a number of newspapers rated it as a great book. I don't know what was your take?
Okay, sure. Yeah, it's gotten a lot of attention, and I know Patrick, and I've talked to him about his book, and I've asked him some of these questions straight out. I think the book is a good book. It's also really subject to interpretation. I think he told a certain story and put certain facts out there, but I think the story and the facts are being interpreted in all kinds of different ways. And so I guess that's a convenient answer because it could be whatever you want it to be. You're right. I worked for Apple for 6 years, and I was there, especially during the period that Patrick wrote about in the early days of when they sold the Fontainebleau factory that was making the Macintosh. And I will say that on facts and narrative, especially of the early days of Apple and what led them to this new strategy in China, I think he had it spot on. He described very accurately what the situation was at Apple. So he got that right. He also, all the players that he described in China, I know most of those people as well, and I would say he got all of that pretty accurate as well. I've asked him though straight out, whether his view is that China or Chinese suppliers did they cheat, did they steal, did they do something nefarious to get in it? And his answer was no. That China was not the villain here. It's just that is how it all played out. And I think you're right, Bryce. That we've enabled our competitors here, but I think the displacement or demise, I think that's up to us. And I think it's a question of how we face the challenge. And I would say that looking at what China writ large, what the supply chain has done is, I agree with Patrick. It's not nefarious, and they're not the villain. It was simply capitalism at its best. The suppliers took their existing manufacturing skills, and Apple was pushing on open door. They were trying to teach at a point when all these suppliers were eager to learn. And those suppliers were extremely flexible and nimble and entrepreneurial and figured out ways to take those skills and apply them to the larger market, to their success. So bottom line, I think the other question that has to be asked here is, could Apple have done this differently? And what do we do about this now? Can this supply chain be moved back to the United States? And I think the answer to those questions is both no. I don't think there was anything that Apple could have done really differently. I think they've got a lot of concentration risk right now in China that they're doing the best they can to try to ameliorate that by moving operations to Vietnam and India. Whether that will be successful, with some success, we'll see what happens there. But no, I don't think it could have evolved any differently. And I think the U.S., if they have hopes of bringing the Apple supply chain back to the United States, there is some really fundamental rethinking that has to take place here that has to do with labor, with skills, with infrastructure, with suppliers, with the relationship between business, between industry and government. These are things that China does really well. And for that reason, I think it's a really good thing that the Apple and China book is out there. I think a lot of people have read it. I hope that they take the appropriate lessons, and I'm trying to do the same thing with the Fragile Dragon. I'm trying to explain in a nuanced way how China is strong and weak, and hoping to explain to people kind of how the whole China system works, so that we can take appropriate lessons from it without necessarily emulating everything that China does and is today.
My take was that the book failed to mention the Taiwanese contribution to the whole equation, and that in the early 90s, a lot of the technological innovation was happening in Taiwan. They're building computers and all these type of things. All these things that we take for granted now was really coming out of that, and essentially wasn't Apple themselves, but like Taiwanese companies who were heavily investing in China and doing the educating themselves and building the platforms and the Foxcons of the future and all those things. That was my point anyway. Really fascinating discussion, guys. Thanks for being on the show. We look forward to the launch of the book. When's the book going to be out, Kurt? When's the official launch?
It's already out.
It should be out now. It should be out now. So check it out on Amazon, but also check it at your local bookstore. This is something a lot of people don't realize, that you can actually go to your local bookstore, ask them to order the book, and they will deliver it to you free. So no need to be on Amazon Prime. They will order the book for you and deliver it to you. So
awesome.
Consider that. Consider local bookshop too.
That's a great recommendation. I will put a link to the book in the show notes for everyone to, if they choose the Amazon option and not close to a local bookstore that you mentioned and out in the boonies somewhere. Manoj, Kurt, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you, Bryce, and
thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us on today's show. Join us in a few weeks for another exciting show. And until then, have a great day.